Hey everybody, and welcome back to Stand By for Adventure. It's Thaco Thursday. Oh, I didn't even look for my Thaco Thursday entry. That's okay, I'm going to come up with something. Because there's plenty of things to go over. What I wanted to talk about today quickly was the fact that D&D Beyond was picked up slash purchased by Dungeons & Dragons, Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, whatever you want to say. I think this is actually probably a good thing. It seemed like their relationship between Wizards of the Coast and D&D Beyond was pretty good, and there was a lot of back and forth between the two. So this seems like a very natural purchase to me. I think this was very likely the plan all along for Wizards of the Coast. I actually was part of a pitch team back 8 years ago. I worked for the folks who made Hero Lab or make Hero Lab, Lone Wolf Development. I forget their name. I don't know why. But yeah, it was not a good time in my life for personal reasons, and so I was, however, involved in some of those discussions, and I know the percentages that Wizards of the Coast thought they should be getting out of a deal like that and how much money it was, and it was actually kind of ridiculous. But they managed to find somebody who apparently could make those numbers work, and that turned out to be Fandom, and they made a really quite a good product. There are certainly things that could change, but they continued to develop it, so that's great. And I think what Wizards said was, hey, if we can find a company to do this, we have proven ourselves to be relatively incompetent when it comes to creating web-based anything except for Magic the Gathering. And in fact, that at the time was 10 to 15 years out of date. Magic the Gathering Online and Magic Arena had not yet released. And that they didn't want to get into doing tools, an electronic tool set for D&D, because I think they recognized that they just couldn't do it. And so instead they found somebody who was capable of doing it, who was able to bankroll it, and I think what they said was, hey, eventually if this works out and it looks good and this edition is successful, we can just buy the company. And I think that's what they did. And I think it's probably a good thing. And they didn't buy the company. Fandom still exists, as far as I know, on its own. Maybe they will continue to make content. I have no idea, because they don't just do D&D. Or if maybe they are part of the deal, but from what I've seen, everything is specifically D&D Beyond. They are not saying, welcome to the party Fandom, which is the company that owns D&D Beyond. They're saying, welcome to the party D&D Beyond. And they specifically say they have acquired a popular digital tool set. So the other thing that's in here, that's in bold, of course, is we have no plans to stop supporting D&D Beyond. Of course they're going to say that, because they would never say anything opposite of like that's just a stupid thing to put into a press release. It's just dumb, but people would ask that question, so I understand why it's here. They're not going to tell you about their future plans unless it's a handful of months away or something like that. And even then, who knows? It's like if you're working at a job and you wonder, like your contract is going to come up if they're going to rehire you. They can't tell you. That's not how business is done. So I'm pleased. I can't say I'm excited. I'm pleased to see that D&D Beyond has been purchased by Wizards, because I think it's a very good fit. I hope they keep most of the managers and workers who actually do the work, because clearly they know what they're doing. They know how to create the product. They know how to make the visuals work really well. They'll probably have access to even more visuals, especially if they're brought in-house. I don't know if they're going to move here to the Seattle area, down in Renton, not far from here, or not. I don't know what they're going to do, but I hope they keep the team pretty much intact. I don't even know why I bother saying that, because at 52 years old, I know that almost never happens, because despite the fact that it should, people need to stay whatever in the area they live in now. They don't want to move. They're not getting paid enough money to move up to Seattle. There's any number of reasons why people may not come. So we'll see. as usual with these sorts of things, I'm pretty sure this will turn out to be okay, and I hope, honestly, that D&D 5th edition continues to be the edition for quite a while, because it's 8, 10 years old at this point and still going strong. And the only update they've done really is the Monsters of the Multiverse book that changed how they present some of their information. I think they may actually adapt more of a Magic the Gathering approach to editions of D&D and just slowly change things over time, so that there's not a new edition. It's just some new books that slightly alter what come before it, and maybe eventually they'll come out with an updated player's handbook for 5th edition that will include all those changes, or the DM's guide or the monster manual will include all those changes and will effectively be the new edition. And I think that's a good way to handle it, because then you don't have the edition wars thing. You just have people who are like, oh yeah, this is basically the same game. I'm playing a character from 15 years ago and it still works in this game. That's my thought. If you want to see more about this D&D Beyond thing, I'm sure everybody seems to be commenting on it. I just wanted to say something real quick, because I actually have a little bit of insider knowledge from having gone through the process and meeting with the people at Wizards of the Coast years ago about this, and looking through contracts and all that sort of fun stuff. And it's I think this is a good thing. I think fandom did a great job putting together D&D Beyond. It's the graphic interface is attractive. It's modern. It's usable. There are, like I said, absolutely things that need to be fixed and changed. But off the top of my head, can I think of any? Not particularly. It doesn't matter. But there are things. And yeah, so that's good. The other thing that was announced today was, sorry, the D&D Beyond thing was announced yesterday. Today was the D&D Direct watch along. That they've announced this new D&D Direct, and this I'm really not sure of what that's going to be. I'm a little concerned that it might be sort of how Magic is doing products via their secret lair drop, so that you can buy specific Magic cards reprinted with new art, new designs, new whatever, direct from Wizards of the Coast at a premium price, because they are, in theory, premium cards. So 5, 6 cards for $30, which is a ridiculous price, but there you go. And I'm worried that they might be trying to do the same sort of thing with D&D Direct, whether it's for things like statues or plushies or hanging banners or any other sort of gigaw decoration sort of thing. That sort of thing I wouldn't really mind. So they could do some high-end statues or whatever else, right? Wall hangings that they already do with WizKids as store promos. They could then do as actual physical products to offer for sale to consumers, and they don't have to worry about not meeting a certain sales goal, because they would get X number of sales that are pre-done through the website. They could then make those products to number. So if they get 1,012 orders, they make 1,200 copies of the thing. They send out all of them. They have some for replacements. They have some for their archives and for employees and things like that. And that's a great way to do that sort of business, because collectibles can be expensive to make, and they can be very expensive to store if you have to keep them for a long time, obviously. And yes, these are all absolutely things that people who are making the products at Wizards of the Coast talk about all the time, because any business is going to want to control their costs as much as possible. Again, see Wizards of the Coast no longer making miniatures for themselves because they just weren't able to do it successfully, and instead licensing that out to WizKids. Paizo does the same thing. They are not a miniatures company. They make content. They don't make miniatures. And so WizKids makes their miniatures. WizKids started out as a miniature making company, and they know how to do it, especially now after 20 years, 25 years, 20 years. And even in the early days when I was working there, it was that's just what we did. We made miniatures and we knew how to do it, and our production people knew how to do it, and so that was all fantastic. And I think it's going to be that sort of stuff that we'll see coming from here. I really hope it's not exclusive D&D books or modules. Maybe there would be like some fundraiser ones, or like to for different charities they could do something like that and have it be then Wizards of the Coast would be handling all the money and bringing it in and then handing over whatever percentage that they were going to over to the charity. I think that would be a good thing. I don't want to see exclusive books sold through D&D Direct. I think that would be just a pain. And I know it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. Because why have a middleman if you don't need to have one? Why have distribution if you don't need to have somebody there? I mean, they're still going to want to supply things to their stores that exist out in the world, but as more and more things become digital and digital only, the need for Wizards of the Coast to be working, and anybody, it's not just Wizards of the Coast, to be working with these physical book distributors it kind of goes away. I hope that doesn't happen. I think it's probably gonna, and I'm not talking about next year or 5 years from now. I'm talking about 25 years from now. That might be what they're looking forward to eventually. One other thing I did want to add, so I am going to be really curious about D&D Direct, and I'm going to follow up on this. The other thing that I really think is strange to have come up in this conversation is if people are going to, or if Wizards of the Coast is now going to go out and purchase like drive-through RPG. Much to my friend Steve, who runs the company, much to his regret, I don't think Wizards of the Coast would ever buy drive-through RPG. I think in his dream, what he would like is one of the large book distribution channels to buy his company, or and I haven't talked to Steve about this at all. So Steve Wick is the guy in charge there. So this is just me talking, but or have somebody like Diamond come and say, "Oh, hey, we'll buy drive-through RPG." Diamond Comic Distribution Company is out of Maryland. They're the ones who basically have a monopoly on comics distribution now. At least for the direct market, which is most comic book stores. And I don't think they're ever going to buy something like that. They might purchase the DM's Guild, but even that, there's no reason for them to. Right now, they get 50% of the sales made on that site, and somebody else is managing all of it. They don't need to do anything, and they get 50% of every dollar spent on the DM's Guild. So I don't think that's going to happen. And also, Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro don't want to be in the business of selling other people's products. So they don't want to be selling Onyx Path, and they don't want to be selling Green Renine, and they don't want to be selling Evil Genius Games, and they don't want to sell anybody else's stuff. They're only going to want to sell their own stuff. So are they going to buy drive-through RPG? No. That's my prediction. Never. They never will. Maybe they would buy the DM's Guild and bring that in-house, but I highly doubt that too. So today, what I actually wanted to talk about was embracing failure. I did not, however, go through and come up with a cool little PowerPoint presentation here, because I don't want this to take very long, and I do want to cover a specific topic on this other than the D&D Beyond and D&D Direct information. So embracing failure is something that players, especially new players at a table, have a really hard time with. And you can see this even as a kid, or watching kids play games. When they lose a game, it's hugely affecting. It's really a bummer. Like, people hate it. And that goes away a little bit over time, but you still get annoyed when you lose a game, or if it's consistently going poorly, especially in D&D or any role-playing game, and you sit down and roll the dice and they all just suck. Like, it's just awful and terrible. And you can't do anything, and you can't hit anybody, and if you roll damage, the damage is no good. So, I understand that. That's obnoxious. But one of the things that is fun about D&D is that it is not just a game. It is also an opportunity to act, to like acting as an actor, to convey your character's feelings, emotions, what they're doing, both verbally and through description, or through the words they use or you use as them, and describing what they do. And I think one of the things that is really great about D&D is that you can fail and still have a really good time, and you can fail and still make it be part of the story in a way that works well. Um, I've talked before briefly about people cheating at the table, and I understand when that sort of thing happens for the most part, because the people I game with, it's never egregious, or at least not that I know of. But it's that's one of the reasons why people cheat, is because they don't want to fail, because both they and the GM don't know how to embrace that failure and turn it into something funny, potentially useful, potentially interesting in the game itself. So what I'm going to say is basically, when you fail, really do embrace it. Like, figure out, well, how would your character react, or would they change tactics? I mean, if they 5 times swinging with the sword and they miss, do they just toss that sword aside and take out a different weapon? Like, screw this is ridiculous, I'm going to try something different. It won't make a difference because you're talking about rolling dice, but people do things like that in the real world. I didn't wear the right socks, my team lost. Like, no, that's not how the world works. But think about how your character could react in an interesting way when you do fail something. Again, and I use Critical Role as a touchstone for this because so many people are familiar with it. You get things like in the second campaign when Yasha gets mind controlled, and it happens a number of times, so I'm not really giving anything away, because if you see it happen once, I didn't give that away. It's a continuous theme that happens a number of times because they keep running into things that are capable of possessing people. Or controlling people. And you know that or even in the first campaign when the vampire people are controlling various members of the team, you know the players aren't really having a good time attacking their friends because it kind of sucks. And you can also tell they're not really into it because they don't use all their special abilities that they potentially could use, which I think is actually super interesting. And I mean, it's happened in my games as well, when a party member gets controlled and to attack another party member, because the system gives you all these ways to be super effective in combat. The easiest one is for a rogue. Do you choose to do sneak attack damage? Well, you don't have to do the sneak attack damage. It says you may do it or can do it. You don't have to. So when you get mind controlled and stab one of your party members, you don't have to do that. You don't have to be raging as a barbarian. That just makes it harder for your your friends to take you down before you take them down. And because ultimately what you're trying to do is sort of exert a little bit of control over the character that you're playing, who's been mind controlled. And I like the way that sort of reflects the internal struggles your character might be having when mind controlled, or otherwise dominated in some way. So think about how those failures can be more interesting, and if you can do something to mitigate the loss in some way. Maybe instead of, and this is actually a great example, maybe instead of fighting to the death, you all decide to run away, which is absolutely something that every now and again players in D&D ought to learn to do. And I say that with a little bit of a caveat that if you and your players have agreed from like a session 0 or something like that, that you're only going to throw things at us that we can handle. Maybe it'll be tough, but we ought to be able to make it through fairly safely. In that case, you're really trying to tell a complete story, and you don't want to suddenly change things up on the players and go like, oh, you should have run away. Well, that wasn't part of our contract. You didn't say that we were going to run into something that was going to kill us. And again, this is a conversation that you would have during a session 0. I think in games that I have, I would spell out that it is specifically an option that you may need to run away. Right now, in a game that I'm running, I've talked about a number of times, it's a game set in Sharn, and the player characters think they're being hired by an adult green dragon, or I should say by a green dragon. They don't know what kind of dragon. They thought it was adult. But they think it's a green dragon who is hiring them to do things that they don't morally have a problem with, but they don't necessarily like the way that she's treating them. And they're 3rd or 4th level, so they are not at a power level that they can just be like, hey, screw you, psh, we're out of here. No, that's not going to happen. And that power dynamic makes it more interesting because they kind of have to operate around the outside instead of just directly going at what it is they're trying to deal with. Because I know they don't want to be affiliated with this person long term or this entity long term because they don't really know what she is or what her goal is. So that's kind of a tangent off of the runaway, but it's a different sort of running away where the players recognize we are not capable of taking this thing on right now. Maybe eventually once we learn more about her and we can, finagle our way into her organization, and we can find out some weaknesses or some way to actually weaken her before we confront her, then that is so much more interesting than just a straightforward fight of, all right, here we go, we're going to rush in and try and kill this thing and either get killed or kill the thing. Those are the only 2 options. Instead, I now have levels worth of potential intrigue of them dealing with this powerful being that wants to hire them. So embrace failure, embrace the possibility of failure, and try to make it as interesting as possible. Another thing I wanted to talk about, I was listening to Owen Casey Stevens on the Thursdage podcast or on Facebook today, which I listen to him pretty much every week, and really like Owen, super nice guy. But he said something interesting today, which was, what if I come to the table and I made the wrong character? So I want to play, the game that I'm running right now is like a thief game. So if somebody came to me and said, I want to play a noble rake, like a rake, like a swashbuckler, whether it's a rogue or a fighter or something like that, wouldn't necessarily fit, but could fit, right? Or since this game is based in Sharn, I want to play a sailor. Well, there's not going to be a lot of sailing in this setting, but at the same time, when you look at a lot of fiction, there are a lot of fish out of water stories, especially when you look at things that everybody's going to be familiar with. George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire series, that's one of the main themes of that entire series of books is people who have absolutely no business being someplace somehow end up there. Ned Stark going to the capital city to become the Hand. He's not the right person for that job, even though he would have introduced an interesting sort of morality and purity to the position. That's not what that job does. That's not who will excel in that position. And we all know what happened. Same thing with people like Theon, who is an Ironborn, but he gets sent to be a hostage in the north. Definitely fish out of water. You have Arya, who is just a young girl who ends up becoming an assassin in a completely different foreign land. She has no business being there, but she adapts and she becomes somebody different and competent and interesting, despite the fact that if you showed up to the table for a D&D game and said, I want to play a 9-year-old girl, your GM might be like, wow, okay, that's going to be interesting. But it's possible to do some really great stuff with that. And in a book, it's easier to do that because you get to engineer exactly what ends up happening. Whereas in a role playing game, you don't necessarily get to determine every single thing that happens. But it gives you that sort of idea, right? Like, write up a character that is a little bit of a fish out of water, that has some things to learn, and actually play the character that way. And you'll find it's really pretty interesting. Like, maybe you have a character who's from a small town, who's just come to the big city, and everything is amazing and impressive to them. But do they welcome that, or is it scary to them? Is it exciting, or is it concerning? There's all sorts of different ways you can go about portraying your character's reaction to these sorts of things that are overwhelming to them. And it ends up being very, very interesting in making your character stand out and be unique. However, if you did actually make a character who is flat out wrong, like I'm playing an all intrigue character and the GM said we're going to go through the Tomb of Horrors, you're probably not going to enjoy playing that character who's meant to be lots of role playing, lots of intrigue, and instead you're going into a trap filled deadly, deadly dungeon where you should be super powerful and not really concerned about talking well. Then you should probably change your character. So keep that in mind though, because playing against type or playing against the counter to the setting can be really interesting if you approach it not from the I'm trying to be difficult and give the GM something difficult to deal with, but in the I'm coming to the table with a character that is not a perfect fit for this, and I recognize and the character recognizes they're not a perfect fit, and it changes the way that you and the character interact with that setting. So much more interesting. So much more interesting. I love fish out of water characters. Absolutely love them. The other thing Owen talked about today that I wanted to mention was, and I think this is super important, and this is a different way of embracing failure, and this is especially good for new GMs. If you are a GM, and I don't care if you're new or old GM or a middling GM or a curious GM, it doesn't matter. Sometimes things are going to go wrong in your game. Something unexpected is going to happen. You're going to put them up against a challenge that they weren't ready for, and it's not the game system's fault. It's you as GM not making smart choices, or not recognizing that you were making deadly choices. And when something like that happens, and the example Owen gave, which I think was made up, was a bunch of low-level characters in his Fantasy Age game. He said, a GM could show up to the table and send 8 wolves after 4 low-level Fantasy Age characters, because the GM has seen in other games and fiction and role-playing games or computer games, whatever, that wolves are easy to kill. Like, that's just not a threat. Well, in Fantasy Age, wolves are actually pretty tough, and a group of 8 will kill, just slaughter a group of low-level characters. So in that case, that GM can either say, well, I guess we just have to live with this, and you guys have to write up new characters, and we'll start a new game, which I don't recommend because that's not the player's fault. That's your fault as the GM. Instead, I think what's smarter, and this is what Owen said, is and this is why I'm mentioning this, the GM should instead say, listen, everybody, I realize this encounter was a mistake. I completely underestimated how powerful these things were. I want to retcon things. And the thing that Owen said that I thought was actually quite clever was, let's just say that this was some prophetic dream that you all had, and so you know not to go this direction, and instead you will make a different choice and go in a different direction, which then allows the GM to change what they're going to run into and have it be something that's more balanced for them. And I think this is unique to role-playing games, and I think it's a super important thing to do for the GM, who is the final arbiter of what's correct and not correct in the game, to be able to say they've made a mistake. And because you are gaming with your friends, I think you should do that relatively freely. Sometimes it's okay to let mistakes pass, especially if there's no really long-lasting consequences that you need to worry about. That's kind of the magic of role-playing, is mistakes that turn into cool things. But when a mistake turns into a really bad thing and you, as GM, are the reason for the mistake, take ownership of it and say, hey, listen, everybody, I screwed this up. I made a mistake. I didn't plan this encounter correctly. I didn't take into account the amount of damage that this thing that I threw in at the last moment was going to be causing everyone. Maybe it's a trap. Maybe it's some sort of ranged combatant or something like that who nobody can get to. I'm sorry. Let's just go back, reset somehow. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe it was something else entirely. You'd have to come up with the exact reason for it in the moment. But I think that sort of thing is very, very useful, and it not only lets the players know that, especially new players, know that they're new to gaming and they're going to make mistakes, but the GM is also potentially new to gaming, and even if they're not new, that the GM is fallible, and that's important, and the GM needs to be able to be fallible in order to make things right. And it's kind of an apology on the GM's part, right? Like, I made something too tough. I didn't realize it was going to just kill everybody and end the game. That's not what any of us want. We show up here every week because we want to play. We want to do this. And I don't want to end the campaign based on a mistake, based on something stupid that I did. So keep that in mind when you're running a game. Don't be afraid to tell people when you've been wrong, you've made a mistake, and then take steps to address that and fix it and make the game better. And you will be more cautious in the future. Hello, kitten. You will be more cautious in the future when designing encounters so that that sort of thing doesn't happen. I think it's a super, super useful thing to do, and I really thought it was great that Owen brought it up today, and I wanted to include it in this discussion. So now what I want to do, if I can find it, is pull out my AD&D Player's Handbook down here. And we're going to play Thaco Thursday, because I'm all done with that stuff. So let's just run through those tips again. So embrace failure. Run away. Embrace failures with your dice rolls. So if something bad happens, change the way your character is acting or behaving. If you've made the wrong character, own up to it and possibly substitute somebody in, or do the fish out of water thing, or even start with the fish out of water thing and see how it works, and just play with that. It can be a lot of fun. If you're in a game, everybody's human, and you want to play a goblin, that's absolutely a fish out of water, or some combination of things like that. It could be any number of other races and one classically monstrous race, right? Like, that character is going to stand out, which, again, very much like the second campaign of Critical Role, where Sam plays Not the Brave, and great character, because it sort of a little too quickly became, in my opinion, oh, we're just going to ignore the fact that that girl is a goblin. I would think in most settings, a goblinoid race would be like, that's a little weird. But again, it depends on how cosmopolitan your setting is, what you want to be doing in your setting, so who knows. I'm thinking more classically, like from first, second, third edition D&D, where goblins and orcs and hobgoblins and all those other things were not typically player character races. So anyway, that's where my head was. And then if you're doing fish out of water, great. And then GMs should be okay admitting mistake, fixing their mistakes if they've made one, and letting the game continue. So, THAC-O Thursday, we are back to. And one of the things I wanted to talk about here... Wow, what's somebody... Oh yeah, this is an old player's handbook. And this is... Oh man, this is old. Holy moly. Last time we talked about like racial minimums and maximums and all that sort of stuff, and what classes races could be and what level they could get to, and it's really crazy, all that stuff. So this one I wanted to mention, and I'm going to run through a few of these because I think they're kind of fun. So it used to be that every single level of a class had a name to go with it, unless it got skipped. And in fact, I see this 5th level cleric was skipped in the original rules. So clerics, a 1st level cleric was an acolyte, 2nd level was an adept, 3rd level was a priest, 4th level was a curate, 5th level apparently was also a curate because it's blank. 6th level was a canon, 7th level was a llama, 8th level was a patriarch, not matriarch specifically, but I guess it would be a matriarch if it was a woman. 9th, 10th, 11th is high priest or high priestess. Druids was an aspirant, then an ovate, then an initiate of the 1st circle, 2nd circle, 3rd circle, 4th circle, 5th circle, 6th circle, 7th circle, 8th circle, 9th circle, and at 12th level you were a druid, at 13th level you were an archdruid, and at 14th level you were the Great Druid, of which there was only one. Fighters had veteran, warrior, swordsman, hero, swashbuckler, myrmidon, champion, superhero, lord. Also, man, that piece of art right there is just such a classic piece of nostalgia. The Paladin in Hell, which they actually ended up writing an adventure specifically for that image. Just a great old image. Let's see, paladins. I remember rogues or thieves being really good. Where's my rogues? Here we go. So thieves, they weren't rogues in AD&D, they were thieves. 1st level was a rogue or apprentice, then a footpad, a cutpurse, a robber, a burglar, a filcher, a sharper, a magsman, a thief, and then a master thief. So all of the classes had these. And I don't know if anyone used them, because I never did. Like, because these are specific things, right? Like, if you're a 4th level thief, it's calling you a robber. Well, a robber is somebody specifically who robs people. Who, like, I'm not sure if that would be mugging robber. I think so. That would be a robber. Whereas a burglar at 5th level is somebody who breaks into places and steals things. A filcher is somebody who sells things like a fence, or maybe they sell things that are cheap or not good. A footpad, that makes sense. Cut purse, these are all, the street thieves sort of things. So yeah, it's just sort of an interesting thing that I think immediately went away with second edition, AD&D second edition. But back in the original game of AD&D, all the classes had their own level names, and they're fun, but they serve absolutely no purpose. This is fun. An assassin. At first level, you were a Bravo. At second level, a Rudderkin, which is interesting because there's actually, I think, a demon called a Rudderkin now, or it's some kind of monster. Third level was a Waghalter for an assassin. Murderer, Thug, Killer, Cutthroat, Executioner, Assassin. So there's all these different terms, and just really, really crazy stuff. And again, once you got to 15th level as an assassin, you were the grandfather of assassins. That was it. That was where you could get to. As a monk, at 17th level, you were the Grandmaster of Flowers. That was it. There was one of them. I might be misremembering some of this. But I really enjoyed those level names, and it's kind of interesting to think that some of those actually turned into, like, character class kits in second edition AD&D, and turned into subclasses in later editions that had their own specific abilities and powers and cool, like, access to special abilities. So it's kind of interesting how that morphed into mechanics that we have today in a completely unexpected and different way. So there's your Thaco Thursday for today. I'm not sure if anyone out there even remembers that the old, well, except for like some of the OSR, old school Renaissance players, or the people who are still playing AD&D, if they even remember that the classes levels each had their own name. And it's just something I've always thought was really kind of fun. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to check out more about those, I'm sure there are sites out there that list all the different levels and classes and their names and everything. But there you go. That's everything for today. Stand by for adventure. We'll be back soon. I hope you're enjoying these. Do feel free to give me some comments down below. And yeah, I appreciate it. Have yourself a good